morning, everyone. Thank you so much for giving us your time and attention this Monday morning. We're really excited because I think this is our third time having Pete on our call for community solutions at this point, at least in the time that I've been with GPNP and the Forbes Funds. And Pete is the founder and CEO of Lattitude. One of the things that I do want to mention this morning is as we're continuing to very quickly respond to a lot of the policy updates and kind of media information that's being received around impacts on the nonprofit sector. One of the things that I've seen most from the public policy update last week to, news articles this morning, is that community works faster than government. And so in the nonprofit space, in terms of how we're building relationships together, making sure that we are prioritizing spaces where we can build trust, spaces where we can build resilience and credibility among our ecosystem, and bringing other folks into that work is critical. And so for this morning's call, I know we're going to talk about, mentorship, but one of the things that Pete has really tapped into since I think 2.5 years ago, we started this conversation, Pete, related to the nonprofit sector, is also building your personal board and making sure that you have a group of individuals around you that are supportive of you, your objectives, and the work that you're doing. And so applying what is typically thought to be something that can be influential or impactful in a corporate setting and in terms of professional mentorship can also absolutely apply to the nonprofit sector and to our space as we're really working to build meaningful connections. And so I wanted to preface with that because as you can imagine, I have quite a few public policy updates this morning, but the space that I'm going to really focus on after Pete's presentation is the ways that we can build the infrastructure for some of those relationship building opportunities. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll get through our beginning kind of script here for just a moment for those who are new to the calls for community solutions. Since March of 2020, we've had 5,544 calls with over 47,400 participants. And these calls have kind of morphed from emergency response from COVID to providing resources and updates. And I suspect this year it will also become, again, a place to share rapid response opportunities, changes to funding, policy changes, and really make sure that the nonprofit sector is in a position to respond versus to react to a lot of things that are coming at the federal and state level. I want to thank Christine for setting this call up with Pete, again, focusing this conversation on the relationship building aspects of our work. And again, a lot of that is grounded in our two frameworks of the Sustainable Development Goals and the social determinants of health, because we know that very similar to individual relationships, we have a lot more things in common than we do different. And so when it comes to shared funding opportunities, aligning our work, and building goals to better serve those that we see on a daily basis, when we talk about gender equality or decent work and economic growth or equity and access to education or healthcare, there are a lot of threads that are mutually reinforcing in these spaces. And so just a weekly reminder to focus and lean into collaboration versus competition, especially now. And with that, I do want to invite you to come on camera if you can. We appreciate your engagement and your time and attention this morning. And also, if you're not in a space to come on camera, please throw your name and organization in the chat, because we do want to make sure that for those that are able to join us and who are requesting updates in this space, that we're being responsive to you as well. Pete is, I skipped a slide. Pete is, as I said, the founder and CEO of Lattitude. And this session is going to be wrapping up National Mentoring Month and also provide a deep dive into how we're navigating career maps, but also the importance, as I said, of building that personal board of advisors in addition to the professional board of advisors. And I think for a lot of nonprofit employees, those are often overlapped. And so this is going to be educational content, interactive discussion, an action plan creation for you. And I think as Pete and our team were prepping for this call, one of the things that he pointed out was over the last few years, as he's been presenting, this has been, kind of one-off presentations or conversations with our group, and now this work is published. So congrats to Pete on publishing his book as kind of a roadmap and a way to continue approaching career transitions and creating a reference and resource for folks that are in that space. Before I turn it over to you, Pete, I do want to invite Fred Brown, our president and CEO, to say a couple words, and I'm going to stop sharing just to give the floor to Fred. And then Fred, if you wouldn't mind turning it over to Pete to begin his presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning, all. Emily alluded to earlier, and we said this during the last few calls, that um, we're going under rapid change in our ecosystem, and we typically ask people for help when it's too late, or when it's critical. And so I hope Pete's message today helps us contemplate an ecosystem at a different level. As many of you know, 6 years ago, when this team came on board, we froze our assets and restructured our grant making with a construct that no single organization can solve the day's problems by themselves. And so this notion that as an individual organization, you can solve complex problems just don't seem uh, feasible. Given the stresses and shocks coming to our ecosystem over the last 5 or 6 days, um, we're not prepared to react to that, as well as we don't have a place to really land the plane that we're flying. And so we need to rethink, recalibrate, and refocus how we do this work. And Pete's work is critical because change moves at the speed of trust. And so our inability to trust creates hesitation in building things together. And we know that 4% of the nonprofit ecosystem collapsed during the first round of COVID. And we know also that there's going to be 2.5 new jobs, 2.5 new million jobs as a result of AI. And so we have a multitude of things happening simultaneously. And we need to, as a sector, begin to think about, well, what does that mean to me? What do these policies mean to me directly, indirectly? And how am I building a more robust, agile, iterative organization? And lastly, one that's collaborative. And so I say all of these things in honesty and truth because, that's what we've been doing. Um, and this is about a level of fear for serving humanity. And so our work around humanity-centered design is centered in this work. However, Pete's framework is critical in creating the infrastructure that's required to move beyond the theory to action. And so I'm looking forward to Pete being on. Thank you, Pete. I think this is the third time you've been on the call for Community Solutions. So Pete's been a great asset, a partner, and very akin to our ecosystem in its unique nature. Pittsburgh's depth of philanthropy creates a different kind of animal for the nonprofit ecosystem. And I said this on the last call, and I'll repeat this, and I hope you can hear me. Those organizations that can adopt an entrepreneurial mindset over the next 1,460 days or 1,457 days are going to be able to navigate what's coming. Those who stick to the traditional framework are going to have a difficult time navigating what's ahead of us. So thank you, Pete. I look forward to listening to you, learning, and exploring what's possible.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everybody else for joining today. And I want to also give a shout out to a couple of the other great mentoring organizations around town. So what I'm going to talk about today is just a little bit of overview. So if you're a leader, this is something that can help you. If you're an individual contributor, this is something that can help you. I also want to think about how what we're going to go through today can be applied in the work setting, but can also translate to some of the personal side. Maybe you're involved in sports or other, efforts and initiatives with the youth. So some of these ideas and concepts can be carried over there. So please be very active. Put your questions, comments, thoughts into the chat. I'll go through a quick agenda so you'll see the flow of show here, some of the thoughts that I have planned out. But I'll work with Christine and Emily to make sure that we get everything addressed. If not during, then I have some time afterwards. So hello to many of the familiar faces and hello to a couple of of new faces here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if somebody can, there we go, thumbs up, thank you. Happy National Mentoring Month. I just wanted to start off with this. Colleen Fedor and Mentoring Partnership do a great job with this in many of the nonprofits arenas in our region and beyond. But this is something that's been going on since 2002. So anytime it's January, it's a great opportunity to just give a little bit of refresh to this mentorship piece. So Emily and Christine were aware of this. They said, oh, well, who can talk about some mentorship for organizations? And let's talk about it from a leadership strategic perspective. So just a fun tidbit. And again, this is kind of wrapping it up. Just because January ends doesn't mean mentorship has to end. So just a quick reminder for everybody there that we can keep this going, and it's meant to bolster it. Just one piece that I want to share on my background. It's a lot about the why, right? All the things that I do. So I'm from this area, right? Grew up in Butler on a farm. I've facilitated many conversations in my professional career because I thought that's what really successful people had, was a support system. And I asked more and more folks, how'd you get to where you are today? And they kept telling me this recurring theme of they didn't do it alone. So I said, all right, a lot of us need this thing. Many of us don't really know how to find that support and guidance and advice. And then we don't necessarily know how to go about this mentoring process. So a couple years ago, I said, all right, there's no solution out there. I'm going to solve this problem. And if you think about the why behind Latitude, it was born to ensure no one navigates their career alone. Something we can all get behind, right? Fred, what you talk about from theory to action, this is about us taking action, right? Change moves at the speed of trust. And the first piece of any relationship is building that foundation of trust. So as we start to think about this, what we're going to talk about today is good mentorship programs, right? We'll talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. We'll talk about that career map, personal board of advisors. We'll get into the Q&A and then some of the discussion around planning for growth. So whenever we step back and think about this, what does a good mentorship program look like? Now, I think it's like 93% of large organizations now have a mentorship program. And I'll tell you right now that I've talked to not every single one of them, but a fair few, and you would be amazed at how lackluster some of them are. Many mentorship programs are just kind of check a box, boom, that's taken care of. And that gets to the first bullet point up here, right? Leadership engagement and alignment to the organizational goals is number one. If we're not going to say, hey, here's this thing, here's how it applies to the larger picture, and we have those folks at the top of the food chain pushing this forward, it's very difficult to succeed if we don't have that right from the start. So think about that. If you're involved in a mentorship program, is it somebody's stretch assignment at a lower level and they don't necessarily have the resources, the support? It's oh, well, this is kind of nice to get done when you have the availability. It's not, if you aren't prioritizing it as a leader, then how in the world can we expect our people to prioritize something? So walk the walk, talk the talk. Once we have those organizational goals alignment, then we need to build up some goals and expectations. The what we're going to do and the how we're going to do it for the program. Once we get into each of the relationships, we'll do goals and expectations for each mentor-mentee pairing. And I'm going to help you stretch your mind a little bit further beyond that. We want to make sure we have equitable access for participation, right? You might have a couple of different mentoring programs as your organization evolves and flourishes over time. But we want to make sure that it is possible for all individuals to get the growth necessary for their development. Like I said, it might be a couple of different programs, not one size fits all. So think about that piece. We want to figure out how we're going to train people. This is one of the biggest shortcomings after the, hey, we don't have any goals and expectations. What are you doing in order to train people? Emily alluded to the fact that I was able to publish the book. It's about a year, almost a year and a half in market now. So it's very exciting. People might say, hey, I can do all this. I just need a little bit of support. Check out the book. I'll put the link in the chat as one opportunity, one asset, one tool to help, right? That's the training and resources. Notice that we're going to teach people how to be a mentor and how to be a mentee. And then there's a couple of checklists that go along the way as well. We want to figure out if there are other resources or technology that can help us streamline and bring some consistency to the process. Another shortcoming that we see a lot of times is, all right, this group over here or this team is doing something that's really helpful. And then this team over here is doing something that's a bit different. At the end of the day, maybe it's helpful, but we have a lot of lack of consistency across organizations. It's nice to have a mentor-mentee assessment, right? This is going to save us a little bit of time. We want to make sure we're gathering ongoing feedback. That can be as simple as, hey, how's it going after each conversation? Yeah, one of the things we like to do is midway through the program, you're going to have a little bit of a checkpoint, right? And that's looking back to those goals that we set out, right? In bullet point number 2, the goals and expectations. We ask everybody in the organization, hey, this stuff we've been doing for the last couple of months is A, B, and C happening, right? Because if we can't measure it, we can't improve it. Track the progress and metrics for accountability. This is accountability for the mentors and the mentees, right? If we're able to get that feedback of, hey, how's this going? Is this actually happening? Then that makes it a little bit easier. And then another opportunity that a lot of folks miss out on is sharing those success stories and lessons learned. Let's face it, we like to be around winners, and we like to be able to continue to grow, develop, and flourish with others. And by hearing what's worked for others and some of those wins, it may open up our minds to, oh, I could try that on for size. That might be a good one for me. Maybe it's a question that was shared in another, conversation. Maybe it was another approach. Maybe it was this idea of reverse mentoring, where I say, hey, I went in to, share some knowledge with this individual that was younger than me, less experienced than me, more likely. And I ended up learning A and B and C. So keeping that open mind and continuously sharing those kinds of pieces, super, super helpful. So we'll go into some of the roadblocks, right? And you could probably guess, okay, Pete, if you just shared what good looks like, then these are probably they didn't do what was on the prior slide. Somewhat, yes. I'm just going to scoot through these a little bit quickly, right? Lack of structure and process throughout the full life cycle. That's another shortcoming where we might say, all right, let's launch this thing. And then what happens is the leaders may have been involved at the beginning, but then they say, oh, I'm super busy. I got to do other stuff along the way, right? Put your hand up if you've ever been in a situation where that's happened. Let me see if I can expand the window here. Okay, I see a couple of hands. I see a lot of hands that are going up over here, right? And it's not atypical, right? So I just want to share that out. It's not the end of the world. Participants are unsure of the goals, right? If I don't understand, how this impacts me, how this impacts the organization, it's kind of difficult for me to get on board with it. One quick tip, here's a best practice. Maybe you can put this into effect in your organization, is this idea of a mentor Monday. So you say, hey, we're going to pick the second Monday of each month. Maybe it's the third Monday of each month. And from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, everybody in our organization is going to have one mentoring conversation, right? Something small. You can try it on for size. You change the date, the time, fine. You get the idea, but we're walking the walk and talking the talk. And maybe it's even 20 minutes. Sure. Can you have more than one mentoring conversation each month? I'm perfectly on board with that, but let's start small and let's start with something that's able to scale. A lot of times mentors, mentees, they move to a new role and they say, oh, I can't do this mentoring stuff anymore. So thinking about how we get that culture of cohesive collaboration and the commitment to it to continue developing. No training, got it. Unclear objectives, got it. Missing a connection to the annual self-development process or life cycle. Hey, boss, I got this annual review that I have to prepare for, but nowhere on there does it talk about my development and connection with others and mentorship. Gosh, doesn't that make it kind of tricky to prioritize something that I'm not getting reviewed on? So something to think about is, how do we put into the review process me learning from others, but also me guiding others? Something to think about on the soft side, and then we'll see how it translates to hard business results and positive impacts over time. No time set aside. That's why we talk about the Mentor Mondays. Insufficient. A lot of people don't understand, hey, what it takes to run a mentorship program. There's plenty of folks that are great at messing one up, but we want to talk about how to set up ourselves for success here. And then how do we measure this progress over time? So a couple of things. And if you just went through those 2 slides, you're like, Pete, I am so on top of this, then I'd love for you to just shoot me a message in the chat and say, we are doing an awesome mentoring program, because I always love learning from the best. And if you're like, hey, maybe there's a couple of opportunities for us to learn a little bit more, can you share some details here? Send me a message, reach out to Emily and Christine. We'll coordinate and get you headed a little bit more in the right direction. So moving forward to who this can impact, right? I got a couple of the pieces around here of total alignment, right? Forbes Funds is all about aligning with our sustainable development goals, right? The SDGs, social determinants of health, and then the 8 R's. That was actually pretty cool, but seeing how these pieces come into effect. All right, well, hey, maybe I'm a little bit less senior in my role. How's this apply to me? So let's talk about this from a pre-career, early career, mid-career, late career, post-career. I guarantee that every single one of us that that are on this call and then that we interact with in our organizations fit into one of those 5 categories, right? Some of those categories are going to have longer spans year-wise in each of them. But we think about this pre-career. All right, if we're going to talk about a career map personal board of advisors, I'm going to have a whole lot of opportunity in the future. But the idea of putting together some kind of a plan and bouncing this off of a few different folks, I might not know who's on my board. I might not know who those long-term mentors are, but I know that I have to start thinking about who are those couple of people that I can go to with questions, right? What do I want to be doing in my life? We'll talk about the 5 dimensions of the career map in just a moment as well. All right, then that's pre-career. Now I get into early career. This is when we're the most malleable. And what's the latest statistic? I think under the age of 35, the average tenure at an organization is less than 2.5 years. So people are moving organization faster and faster and faster. And overall, right, the entire workforce, it's about 4 years people are staying at an organization. So the more we can do in that first 12 months of being at an organization, it's about 40% of voluntary turnover happens in those first 12 months. So this is one opportunity of saying, hey, you're new here. Let's visualize what growth looks like at this organization for you. Right? And that's between the people and that's between the different things we're going to do job-wise. Mid-career, this is where, maybe the folks are kind of late 20s, 30s, early 40s-ish, and they're saying, I don't know that I love what I'm doing anymore. Right? This probably happened to a couple of folks on here. I need a refresh, a recalibration. I just need to figure out what other opportunities are out there. Maybe I need to go back to some of those ikigai workshops, right? The piece where I ask myself, what is it that I love doing, right? What can I get paid for? What does the world need? Right? What is enjoyable? Looking at those couple of different pieces of that exercise. We can dive more into that later if we want to. So that's kind of a refresh. And let's also think about our mid-level management. Whenever our core is very strong, then the rest of the organization can flourish. Those mid-career folks, right, they're going to get advice and guidance from senior leadership, and they're going to be providing the advice and guidance to those that are less experience in the organization. There's one place to start. I like to say, hey, start off with those mid-career folks, those mid-level managers, and then work your way down and then work your way up as we continue going around it. And then I'll bucket the late career and post-career into a how do we think about succession planning from a proactive perspective. Right. So a lot of us will think about, okay, especially in the nonprofit sector. I don't know how much longer our leadership's going to be here. Right? What can we be doing today to get ready for the varying kinds of tomorrows that could impact us? Maybe it is in the next 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 2 years, 1 decade, but we need to be thinking about how can we be sharing, hey, this is how this individual got to this phase, this point of their career, this opportunity. Here's some of the different skills, accomplishments, achievements, education, so that others are able to learn, okay, I see how they got to where they are today. I've been able to have multiple conversations conversations over time. And one thing to think about is whenever somebody gets to, let's call it level 4 in the organization, for example, we're going to talk about 1 or 2 or 3 potential successors. So again, it's a proactive approach. We're going to see how those successors can go onto the personal board of advisors, so that this is just another flavor of mentorship along the way. Whenever we look at this from integrated to the business life cycle, we say, hey, onboarding, great opportunity to talk about the career map and the personal board of advisors again. Promotions, right? Anytime somebody gets into a new role, hey, it's a great time to refresh. Do I need to have a couple of different personal board members that are guiding me along the way? Maybe they're all right. Promotions, new roles, thinking about the work-life balance. We're going to go, and this is something that we as leaders really have to stress. One, that we're walking the walk and talking the talk. There's going to be phases whenever we're work to live to work. We've all had very intense chapters of our professional journeys. And I think we need to keep that in mind that, hey, there's certain phases whenever I'm climbing that ladder, I'm grinding. But then there's certain phases when I say, hey, I need to take care of the personal column on that career map. Maybe that's the family that I'm growing. Maybe that's the family that I'm taking care of. Maybe that's loved ones and parents or aging individuals that I need to spend a little bit more time for, right? We're going to go through different cycles of life, and to understand that is critical in this process. Performance improvement plans. A lot of times people get a mentor just because they're kind of on the down. So let's look at mentorship from a proactive perspective and a good thing. Hey, Chris, you need to go get yourself a mentor over here. You're just really not performing well at work. And you're like, oh, so HR is the bad guy. Now mentor is a bad guy. And we have this bad taste in our mouth versus, hey, James, you just came into this organization. One of the things we do, here is get you set up with a bit of a welcome wagon, right? Whoa, I thought the last place I worked, my buddy Chris got in trouble whenever he got a mentor. No, we take a different approach here, right? And this is your support system that helps set you up for success. Are your mentors and guides still going to be with you whenever, you have those bad days and those down phases and chapters? Yeah, sure. But we look at this from preventing some of those tougher times. If that makes sense, just give me a quick thumbs up from the folks that are still here with us. Okay, cool. Succession planning, we talked about that. And then anytime we're at the networking and water cooler conversations, if we ever get back to one of those, but I think you get the idea around it. This is where we talk about, hey, here's what my career map may look like. This could come up in conversation. Whenever we think about our personal board, we might say, bring it up in conversation. Hey, Celeste, I'm trying to figure out this champion board seat that I have. I've listened to this Pete guy talk and Pathfinder's book. You have a champion that you're working with, right? That split level mentor, somebody that's a little bit ahead of you, and they're helping you reverse engineer, work bottoms up, back from end to today on the career map. And Celeste like, yeah, such and such, here's how I go through it. And here's somebody that might be a good champion for your board. So just a couple of things to think about as we keep moving forward. Now, you heard me talk about this career map idea a few times. I'm just going to touch on it at a high level. We can go back to this at a later time. But whenever we think about past, present, future, everybody's able to do this quick exercise. Again, more details in the book. We can talk offline. I get fired up about this stuff. But if people have a career map, which many folks, just in the chat, I'm curious here, just give me a yes or a no. Do you have a career map that you've looked at, updated, reviewed in the past 5 years? Let's see what kind of responses we get. No's. Okay, well, we're getting good engagement. We're not getting very positive remarks on here. 5 out of 10. Okay, well, hey, last time I checked, Emily, 50% is not what we'd call a passing grade in any classes around here. There we go. So see, it's a thing. We're all rock stars and very successful leaders in this call here, in this setting, but most people said business plan does not count. No. unless there's a section in there that has your personal career map on there. So I'd say maybe you're 5.5 out of 10, just so that you can be slightly ahead of Emily there. But I think it's that piece is, hey, all of us can agree this is something that's helpful. Are we taking time to lead by example? Because again, remember, if we have this career map for us and then we're able to share it with others, and that's a great piece of how do we develop them? How do we show what's possible? Because if we're just talking to them in your typical mentoring conversation, there's a lot of things that we may miss out on along the way. And we don't want to do that, right? We don't know what we don't know, and they don't know what they don't know. So looking at this from the job column, the skills, education, achievements, and accomplishments, and some of that fun stuff. Again, past, present, future. And we're going to do this at each of the different phases of our journey. One of the things that Emily and Fred talked about is, hey, we're involved with nonprofits. There's some people from the for-profit sector on the call here today. Let's think about this. We usually have a board of advisors, board of trustees, board of directors. And what do? They guide the CEO. That board does not get involved in the day-to-day activity in most instances, right? They're guiding the CEO. Same thing with us, right? We can't go to this board, these multiple mentors and advisors, and say, hey, you know, uh, let's see, who are we going to pick on now? Melody. Melody, I need you to do this. You're my cross-functional mentor, and this has to happen. And you're just like, what in the world? This is not what I signed up for, right? So thinking about how we're going through this from the mentee perspective, protege perspective, but also how if we're in that situation in the mentors kind of space, and whenever we're that guide helping others, we're able to say, hey, this is how what you just shared came off to me. Maybe you didn't mean it like that. A helpful approach where I can be most valuable and add value to you may be like this. And here's some things to think about. So that little bit of those coaching moments, constructive coaching, I like to call it, is a way for us to maybe just reframe a little bit of those talking points as we keep going through it. So now you heard, okay, Pete, you talked about this personal board a couple of different times. What does this mean? Some of these faces might actually resonate. Some of you might be like, oh, I know so-and-so over there. But step one, we're going to surround ourselves with a couple of different people. Got it. Okay, Pete, that makes sense. I already got a couple of people. There's different icons for each of the specific board seats that we're working to fill. Next page, I'm going to go into that. And then once we figure out, okay, here's the kind of sort of guides that I think I need at this phase of my life. The board can change over time. A-okay. Then I'm going to put a face with a name to each of those seats. Big question that I get asked very often is, hey, Pete, I'm going to go to the next page here. I got my boss, my supervisor. Can they also be my mentor? And then maybe they're going to be my accountability partner. I'd say they can in the short term. I'm going to challenge you in the first 12 months of putting your board together that you don't have, after 12 months, right? You don't have one person's name in multiple board seats. Why is that? Well, I'm an engineer twice over, a lot of risk and opportunity program management. We think about single points of failure. Say I got 6 people on my personal board of advisors, and my boss is my functional mentor, is my accountability partner. Well, the last time I checked, that's 3 out of 6, 50%, not a passing grade on a test, and also not great whenever I just lose half of my board if I change organizations or that person leaves. So we're thinking about this from diversifying those perspectives more and more and more as we keep going through this. I'm not going to dive into all of these right now, but whenever you say, hey, Pete, where's a good starting place for this personal board of advisors? You said you got me a little bit of flexibility. I can take 12 months to build this up. Think about your supervisors, number one. Most of us report to somebody. If you're at the top of the food chain, think about somebody that maybe is on your board, right? Could be in this role here. So this might be the title on the board, but we might massage what some of that individual is. Okay. Functional mentor. If I'm in marketing, for example, or I'm in finance, for example, I'm going to find somebody that has hopefully worked for my supervisor before. I'm in finance. They've been in finance, right? Ideally, they had my role before. Same thing. If I'm in marketing, hopefully they are in marketing or were in marketing. This is somebody about 5 to 10 years of experience ahead of me. And notice I said experience, not age, right? There's been plenty of times whenever I've had people on my board at various life phases that were on paper age-wise younger than me, but experience-wise, they knew more in certain areas, right? So functional mentor, somebody that's been in my shoes, cross-functional mentor, they're different track, right? I want to make sure for any of these board seats that I'm aligned with them professionally. I'm aligned with them kind of the way they operate, and we go into, excuse me, a little bit of a checklist. So think of it kind of like dating, right? Most folks throughout the dating life cycle, you say, hey, here's the non-negotiables. Well, why aren't we doing that with our professional development as well? If there's, I get a mentor or one of these other advisors and I don't trust them, I don't feel safe, I don't feel respected. Gosh, doesn't that make it very difficult to think that they're going to tell me what I need to hear, not just what I want to hear, and they're actually going to help me get to where I want to go to? So don't settle. This is, again, why we're giving you 12 months to get started with this personal board of advisors. A lot of opportunities coming up of how we can actionalize this across the Forbes Funds community. We'll talk with Emily and Christine about that in the future, very, very near term. So we think about buddy, supervisor, functional mentor, and then the accountability partner. If you have somebody, many of us might have a buddy program today. So that's somebody who's going to kind of show you the ropes. Think this is the least formal seat on your board. You're going to go through that first review of the career map together. That's really what the buddy is. And then accountability partner, they're really going to focus on column 5 of that career map. I'll go back up. I'll try to go back up to it. I'll go back up to it real quick. So the personal fun stuff, right? Social isolation, loneliness. This is a big issue, especially the last 5 years. And the accountability partner is accountability buddy, as some people have started to call it. That's really where they're looking, and then working their way left from there on the career map. So just a couple of pieces, right? Here's the successor down here. I want to talk a quick update from the business side. So it's been a great partnership with Fred and the rest of the organization. So what are we doing from a Latitude perspective around this, right? Engages people in mentorship programs from day one. It is a software, and we do this through surveys, through learnings, through the career map, and through the personal board of advisors. So just a couple of tidbits that I want to share with everybody is, okay, this career map piece, I can put together an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, but what if I wanted to scale that, bring some more consistency, right? One of the things that is possible, again, this is just our technology, but I want to just kind of visualize, one, because I'm really proud and excited about it, but how might we do these things for the rest of our people, right? So we're going to upload a resume, show, visualize kind of where I've been and where I'm at. And just think about that from any mentoring relationships you've been in the past. If you're able to see something, doesn't that make it a whole lot easier to be able to provide feedback versus I say, hey, Mary Jo, I need you to help me out with this career thing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know where I'm going to go. Versus, hey, Mary Jo, here's my career map. Here's kind of where I've been, where I'm at. And here's a couple of the potential future trajectories, these career tracks that I'm exploring. What are your thoughts? So you're able to provide feedback and comment on here along the way. So again, figuring out how can we remove some of those friction points and the pieces that are tricky whenever it comes to developing others, engaging the people we have so that we can retain the right talent in order to attract the right folks to our organization as we keep growing. The way this works is mentor match assessment feeds into those suggested conversations. We have the calls, conversations, feedback, notes, ratings, and ultimately we want to build the personal board of advisors. So with that, I'll pause for just a moment. I'd like to get into a little bit of Q&A. What was helpful? Where would, a little bit more information be valuable as we keep moving this thing forward? I am able to go into a couple of other areas here, but that was meant to be just hey, scratch the surface whenever we talk about what's good mentorship look like. What's the first step? Well, make sure everybody has something of a career map, 5 dimensions, past, present, future, and then this idea of surrounding ourselves with a couple of different mentors, not just one. And one last piece before we invite you to come off mute is, We talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility. Well, what if, I'm just getting advice and guidance from one mentor? I talked about the single point of failure, but if there's just advice and guidance, and I'm not saying this is a wrong thing, I'm saying, hey, how can we continuously improve, right? Growth mindset always. Those just one set of lived experiences. But if we're able to say, hey, Fred's giving me a little bit of advice, Alice, Craig, Lawrence, and we focus this on different aspects of the career map, then gosh, now I'm able to grow, develop, flourish a little bit more. And what happens if, I didn't really resonate with the way that, Rebecca's feedback landed with me? I might be able to get a second opinion. So, just a couple of things to think about as we keep moving forward there. All right, Emily and Christine, let's go back and see what kind of questions and comments we got along the way.
Thank you so much, Pete. So I had one question, kind of a prompt, I should say, from Christine. How can we strengthen and leverage our networks to increase our impact and better navigate uncertainty? So I think this is a fabulous question in terms of how some of this advice can be translated to beyond kind of like the career mapping, right? Like, how are we mapping the correct individuals to be able to respond to some of the things that are impacting the sector? And so I'm just curious how some of the frameworks you've identified might be able to shift a little bit to focus on trust building to respond in addition to trust building for kind of like mapping
I
career
think we want to take
trajectory.
a proactive approach, right? I'll stop sharing my screen here so we can all see each other a little bit more easily. I think we want to take a proactive approach because what happens? Usually we get hit with a curveball, something bad happens, and then we say, oh, son of a gun, now I have to go and do these things. I have to figure out who can help me in this area, who can I bounce ideas off of, versus if we take a proactive approach of figuring out who are these kinds of individuals that are able to support me in various capacities before I need it, right? So I think that's a big piece, developing, the trust, the respect, the foundation, the network. And if it's something where you say, hey, I'm at zero right now, Pete, you talked about these board seats, I don't have anybody, then that's an opportunity for us to think about, even just across the GPNP community, who are some individual. That's last time I checked, Emily, right? That's why this is here, right? It's not just for the resources and and the educational pieces, but it's also for the folks, right? Fred, how many times have I heard you talk around the country about the importance of people helping people? So I think for folks to realize, oh my gosh, aha moment, this is another very, very helpful piece. And Fred, if I'm off base, you tell me, but I think that's just
Uh,
a great opportunity for figuring this out together.
I think Christine's question is phenomenal because I think she's putting into the nexus what I think we haven't talked about, which is this is a great presentation, but we have to also weave in the dynamic tension between traditional practices and emerging practices in the framework where technology is taking up space. The second thing is, in Christine's question, I thought, and I hope you can speak to this, and I think Emily spoke to this, is, how do you build trust during a crisis? And how do you hold people accountable who are critical to the community or ecosystem you're building? And at what point how do you confront when they're not being holding up their end, right? That's a big issue to me, and it's going to become even bigger as these crises mount.
I'll add one piece and then some others may jump in here. One of the things that we talked about with good mentoring programs and good relationships on the professional development front is goals and expectations. So if it gets to a point where something happens that wasn't in alignment with our goals and expectations, the what we're setting out to do together and the how we're planning to do it, I agreed to it, you agreed to it. Well, hey, something went off track here. And because we set up, again, proactively early on in each of these relationships, we're able to kind of say, hey, shake things back to reality and figure out, Do we need to change our goals and expectations? Because that could be the case. But hey, we agreed to this right from the start that we could share very openly throughout this relationship. So I think that's the other piece of taking a proactive approach to it and really emphasizing the goals and expectations. Emily, Christine, others, I don't know if you want to add in there if we want to go to the next question or comment.
I do want to go to the next question and comment and then circle back because I think this relates to what you just said. So Lawrence had said, my most useful experience as a mentee was being able to observe my mentors doing their work, leading by example, showing as well as telling. And so I think what you just shared in terms of the accountability, like people who demonstrate accountability are the ones who are accountable. And so as you're building these networks, leading into that, I know that there's that the parable around like what if you're praying for something specific, you're not given that thing, but an opportunity to do that thing. And so I think with the building relationships, a trusted relationship isn't going to fall into your lap. It's something that you have to kind of nurture, as you said. So, leading, by demonstrating that you're accountable, leaning into folks who are demonstrating already that they're accountable, and also giving people a chance to, prove you right and trusting them.
I think that's a huge piece of it. And we actually have gotten into a bit of the levels of mentorship along the way, right? Level one, two, three, four, five, and thinking about how, not from a competition perspective, but from a expertise perspective, right? I've learned what I have to do. I've done it with so many different people for such an amount of time. And then the piece is how can I mentor others that are mentees to me that then become mentors to others and have mentees. And that's really the piece is once I've done that so many times, then I can say, wow, I am pretty good at this piece. And I think there's a similar quote around leadership, right? The best leaders are those that are able to create other leaders that create leaders. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot to think about whenever it's said out loud. But really, it's we are able to show that we have mastered something, whether you're a 10,000 hours person, okay, that's one fine approach to it. But whenever we're able to hand off this institutional knowledge so somebody else is able to do the same for another individual, that's a pretty darn good, piece of that. So just a plus one to what you were saying there.
Thank you. And last question, because I know I do have to switch gears for the policy update in just a sec. What is your actionable like thing this week people can do? Is it setting 30 minutes aside to do an exercise? Like what is the thing that's going to get the wheels moving?
So I'm going to put two links in the chat here. I think some folks did that earlier, so thank you very much for that. But please reach out on LinkedIn, check out the book Pathfinders as a framework, because I think first, and it goes through in part one of the book of, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? And there's plenty of pictures in there. I'm a big pictures kind of guy. There's space on there to write with the different exercises along the way as well. And I think the important thing is to just figure out where you are today, right? And another helpful exercise is to go through 2024. Did you have any mentoring conversations with people that were on your board, that you were on their board, and just look at what took place last year? And then ask the four-part question of start, stop, continue, shift, right? Is there anything that I need to change from, my role as a mentor, my role as a mentee protege? So just thinking about it from that perspective. Start, stop, continue, shift.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing the links, and I know we'll have some follow-up conversations and kind of announcements over the course of this year, leading up to summit time at the end of the year this year. But I want to thank you and appreciate your time, especially at the end of Mentoring Month. This is a really timely conversation, and for leaving us with actionable next steps for how we can continue to do this work in our own spaces.
Thank you all. Happy Monday. Stay warm.
Thanks, Pete. All right, I'm gonna switch gears and go into public policy update. We have quite a few things to get through this morning. And first, I want to just kind of offer a space to check in with folks. I know that last Thursday's Public Policy Committee meeting, I see some folks on the call who were there with us, was really a chance to kind of pause and check in with how a lot of leaders of nonprofit organizations are feeling, in addition to how we're responding to the slew of executive orders and some of the alarming sounding headlines, but are actually different when you look into a specific bill or account of events. And it just seems like a lot to manage on some days, especially as it's related to policies or proposed policies that target or directly impact the nonprofit sector. And so for a policy update today, I do want to start from that place of support where, like, during last Thursday's Public Policy Committee meeting, these were the emotions that were top of mind for the folks who were on the call. And we had about 20 people join us just to kind of share what I'm hearing in different policy spaces, what we're hearing on a specific, whether it's environment, education, immigrant, refugee resources, funding for arts and cultural organizations, and across the entire sector. And we had a pretty good sample size of folks. This is what folks were feeling last Thursday. And so I do want to normalize, when folks are saying, I'm worried, I'm concerned, I'm exhausted, that's okay. And also, there were undertones of, this is a place for support. I'm feeling resilient. I'm determined to keep working. I'm feeling vigilant. And I really want to underline the hopeful and intentional and ready and encouraged lines, because this is the space in terms of network building where GPNP is really looking to be tagged in and support. And so I don't think that I can stress enough the importance of community at this time. I said it at the beginning of the call, but community moves faster than government. And so if we're setting ourselves up to be able to respond better, we are already behind. I think being proactive and making sure that we're setting priorities based on what is most important, not only to our organizations, but those we serve, in terms of consistency of resources, consistency of communication, and stability of us being able to offer those things. One thing that also stood out was that in the list of priorities that were shared during last week's meeting, there were no low priority items, which means that we're going to have to get really good at prioritizing and shuffling the conversations that we're having to make sure that if something is high priority and not in our control, we are keeping each other up to date and communicating. And also, as things become more clear or more in our control, things are shifting from that medium priority bucket to the high priority bucket. And so a couple of things that were highlighted: obviously, the executive orders and anticipated impact and outcomes. This is a place where I'm leaning into National Council of Nonprofits, Independent Sector, and PANO, because they have some really great resources summarizing not only the executive orders, but like the specific parts of the nonprofit sector they're anticipated to impact, and also updates on the legality and point in time assessment of like where each executive order is in terms of implementation process. For example, birthright citizenship not only was rejected or struck down by a judge, but there are 20 states that are suing the federal government for that action. And so looking at making sure that we're leaning into the things that we know, the things that we can control, and then figuring out where we're best suited, aligned with our strengths and the assets that we have within our organizations, within our networks, and also highlighting where we need help and where things are weaker. And I think across the nonprofit sector, GPNP members are way above and beyond the national average in terms of the number of organizations that engage in advocacy and policy work, whether it's from an analytical perspective or building relationships with elected officials, whether that's executive or legislative branches. However, there is a need for some coordination and figuring out the infrastructure for how we're going to continue to do this work in a sustainable way, because this is really a marathon, not a sprint. So looking at GPNP immediate priorities and kind of sharing how we anticipate factoring into this, recognizing that GPNP is not necessarily an individual institution, it is based on the needs of member organizations, and that our priorities are completely dependent on the things that members are letting bubble to the surface and making sure that we're hearing. So the first thing, similar to my question to Pete, the biggest call to action is reaching out to myself and Christine with the things that are top of mind for you or that you need immediate supports on. So we can factor those into our policy agenda, into these Monday community calls, into the conversations that we're already having, and also bring you into other spaces where we're hearing the same thing from other members. So the first thing that I want to highlight is our prioritization of safety for nonprofit sector employees. I've seen a lot of organizations move to removing names of staff or specific DEI language and priorities for immigrants and refugees off of their websites. And I think this is a point where we're really going to have to walk the line between what information absolutely needs to be shared out because it's required by, our 501c3 status, or because it's integral to the services that we offer the community, and what are some of the things that we need to possibly remove from our websites to assure staff and organizational safety and security. So one of the things that we've done is remove the list of members from the GPNP website because that list is searchable by mission area. And so if somebody is looking, for example, who in Southwest PA is doing DEI work, our website is not going to be a conduit to them finding that information, especially if it's for negative purposes. That does mean that it is harder to search for that information if there's somebody who's looking to partner in that space. And so transitioning to that second level of supports for nonprofit sector employees and those they serve. One of the things that Christine, that I'm really grateful that Christine is managing is our member portal. This is a invite-only closed platform to typically access member benefits for GPNP. However, you do not need to be a member to be invited into the portal. There's a private Slack channel. There are private updates. There are ways to connect with other members internally within the member portal. And so one of the things that we're really looking to hear from members on, and from people who are just looking to connect with other nonprofit leaders, is how that can best be utilized to share information and resources. So that includes the facilitating coordination, updating members with clear opportunities to educate and inform through shared resources, like the joint letter that the National Council of Nonprofits published to send to the members of the 119th Congress, looking at how the nonprofit sector can be an ally to government employees, how we can be updating regularly on priorities of constituents to make sure that those that they serve are the priority in their work. And then also creating that sense of empowerment to respond, advocacy and action, making sure that we're allowing our asynchronous advocacy curriculum from GPNP to be publicly available again in this closed network, to make sure that if there's an opportunity that comes up at the local government level, the state government level, the federal government level, that the GPNP members, and again those in the Southwest PA nonprofit community, are feeling, rather than frozen, or not knowing if somebody else is going to take up the mantle, that sense of empowerment to be able to take the next step, whether that's reaching out, responding, or coordinating with other nonprofit leaders and member organizations. And so a list of some of the policies that the executive orders that have been signed already impact most are at the bottom of the screen. And I also wanted to highlight, from the infrastructure perspective, the nonprofit 501c3 role is to educate on issues, encourage civic engagement, monitor policy impact, and maintain neutrality. This is one of the things that I know is increasingly difficult as conflicting information sources are coming out, and we're trying to respond versus react to the things that are coming our way. And I just want to again encourage folks to stay neutral, and also in the spaces where you have trusted relationships with others navigating similar difficult conversations, that we're figuring out ways to support each other when a lot of the conversations that we're having and the services that we're providing are inherently politicized. It is an impossible place to be right now. And so, as folks determine, from a positive relationship with a member of the General Assembly, kind of where they stand on certain things, and how, their relationship can be used to bring in another nonprofit organization to have a conversation and present, their policy priorities in a different way, to really change the minds of some folks on both sides of the aisle, on specific policies, again, at the state level, particularly, that they can support. And also making sure that members of our community are up to date and clear on the services that we're offering, and the things that we are not in a place to offer as well. And again, this is a breakdown of the difference between advocacy, lobbying, and electioneering. And so looking at opinions on a specific government official versus educating versus, sharing the impact of a specific policy or election outcome on your organization. There are lines and ways things that need to be phrased in our communications that make sure that we stay compliant per the IRS and also the Pennsylvania state advocacy and lobbying policy, which is actually a little bit more stringent than the IRS one. All that to say, GPNP will be, again, sharing our advocacy curriculum to go through some of these things so people feel empowered in this work. We gave an overview of the headlines. I'll be sharing a letter later today in terms of like, here's a summary of some of the executive orders and what we're hearing from the federal level. And again, the bottom line, same as last Thursday, is a lot of these executive orders are likely to face legal challenges. Their full implementation and impact remain to be seen. A lot of them are running up against criticism and roadblocks. And so looking at how we can stay informed about these developments, consider how we might need to adapt our strategies and operations. Sometimes that's not necessarily a operations adjustment. It might just be a language and messaging adjustment. But this is the space where, leaning in versus kind of freezing out of fear is going to be really difficult and really important. And so again, some of our network goals from last Thursday's meeting include that member portal as the central hub for policy updates and action steps in a secure and safe way for the folks who are sharing information, fostering a collaborative network of support. And so leaning in, regardless of whether or not an executive order or new policy affects your mission and ability to serve those that you serve, there are going to be domino effects if a family that you serve is also receiving services from an organization that is affected by an executive order or how a policy is implemented. And so really recognizing that while we're balancing, the things that are in our control and not in our control, we are also aware of the interconnectedness of the social service sector. Empowering resilience through mission-focused work. This is a space where looking at personal well-being as well as organizational well-being is important for what can continue to be in our control and what we have the continued capacity to do. And also a lot of adapting and pivoting is going to have to be collaborative. And then finally, encouraging compassionate advocacy. So prioritizing humans, the people we serve, understanding in our efforts, even in a climate of fear and opposition. It's tough. There are some really difficult conversations on the horizon, and that, I know a lot of folks have already been having. And this is a space where education and unemotional responses are going to be critical. And again, that's also, one of the hardest things to do when you're seeing the impacts of these things in real time with your organization. So I understand that we are 2 minutes over. I appreciate the folks that are staying with us. And I want to thank Craig Mayer from our team and his updates each morning on our public policy, kind of, what's being said with executive orders, what's being said from the legislative branch and priorities, and what are some things that are specifically affecting nonprofits. One of the things that we're aware of is that things like the small games of chance licensing and the federal bill that would allow the Department of the Treasury to label organizations as terrorist supporting organizations, and as well as the new regulations from the state of Pennsylvania around how annual reports need to be submitted on an annual basis are being updated. So in the midst of all of these like policy pieces to keep in mind, there are also nonprofit regulatory and compliance things that we're going to be sending out and reminding folks, because I would hate for, critical mission area work to be stalled, not because of something that is, oppositional policy wise or agenda wise, but because of, somebody failing to file their annual report the correct way with the state on time, or because they're reported for conducting small games of chance via mobile payment versus cash or check as the policy currently states. And so there are just some pieces that we have to really make sure are tightened up at this point, as we're having the conversations around collaborative responses to policy. So please feel free to reach out to me if any of those, questions or items sparked your interest. Thank you again for the extra couple of minutes this morning. We had a lot to get through, and I look forward to seeing you next week.